There's a special kind of loneliness that comes after decades of marriage end in silence. Nadine Ashcroft knew that feeling the moment she buried her husband and learned the truth. No estate, no savings, just a forgotten cabin in the Oregon woods. At the will reading, 3 businessmen laughed at her inheritance. She packed her car and drove north alone. The cabin sat waiting in the pines, old and leaning. Inside, under years of dust, she found something that changed everything. Not money or deeds. Something older. Something that whispered secrets her husband never told her. These men knew about it. They wanted it buried. But why guard it for nearly 40 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nadine Ashcroft had spent 40 years organizing other people's stories. As the head librarian at Jefferson Elementary in Portland, she'd mastered the art of finding order in chaos, of cataloging the beautiful mess that was human knowledge. She could tell you where to find a book on butterflies or the Battle of Hastings. She knew which shelf held the poetry that made 8th graders finally understand Shakespeare, and which corner housed the picture books that still made her cry at 67 years old. But she'd never learned how to organize her own life's sudden disorder. 3 weeks ago, Gerald Ashcroft had clutched his chest during breakfast, his coffee cup shattering on the kitchen floor. The paramedics came quickly, but not quickly enough. Myocardial infarction, the doctor said. A widow-maker, someone whispered at the hospital. 48 hours later, Nadine was standing in a funeral home, selecting a casket for the man she'd shared 38 years with, the man who'd promised her security and comfort in their golden years. Their house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood had been her sanctuary. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a garden where she grew tomatoes and basil. Gerald had worked as an executive for Cascade Timber, managing accounts and properties across Oregon. He traveled frequently, came home tired but content. They'd built a quiet life together, predictable and safe. Dinner at 6:30, tea at 8. Bed by 10, she loved the routine. After growing up in a chaotic household with 4 siblings and parents who could barely keep food on the table, she'd craved stability. Gerald had offered that. A steady paycheck, a reliable presence, a man who kept his promises, except it turned out he hadn't. The funeral was small. Sophie, their daughter, had flown in from Seattle with her husband Dean and their 2 children. At 41, Sophie had her father's practical nature and her mother's love of order. She taught high school English, graded papers at the kitchen table, made lists for everything. Seeing her daughter's grief made Nadine's own feel more real somehow, more permanent. The other attendees were mostly Gerald's colleagues from Cascade Timber, familiar faces she'd seen at company picnics and Christmas parties. They offered condolences with practiced sympathy, promised to help with anything she needed, then filed out to their cars and their continuing lives. But 3 men stayed longer than the others. Lowell Brandt was the first to approach her at the reception. Early 60s, silver hair combed back severely, eyes like chips of stone. He'd worked with Gerald for 20 years, though Nadine had never warmed to him. Something about his handshake always felt like a business transaction rather than a greeting. "Nadine, I'm deeply sorry for your loss," he'd said, his hand cold in hers. Gerald was a good man, a very good man. Behind him stood Harlan Knox, mid-50s, with nervous energy that made him constantly check his phone, tap his fingers, shift his weight. He managed something to do with property assessments, Gerald had once explained, though Nadine had never fully understood the details. "Mrs. Ashcroft," Harlan had mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Terrible thing. Just terrible." The third man was Victor Delane, the smoothest of the trio. Late 50s, expensive suit, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd taken both her hands in his, held them just a moment too long. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. Gerald spoke of you so fondly." The words were right, but something beneath them wasn't. She'd spent decades reading children, sensing when they were hiding something, when the tears were real and when they were tactical. These men were hiding something. She could feel it in the space between their words, in the glances they exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. The will reading came a week later, held in the office of Marcus Yates, an attorney Gerald had apparently hired months earlier. The office smelled of leather and lemon polish, all dark wood and brass fixtures. Nadine sat in a wing-back chair, Sophie beside her holding her hand. Marcus Yates was apologetic from the start, which should have been her first warning. "Mrs. Ashcroft, I want to prepare you. The estate is not what you might be expecting." She'd nodded, assuming he meant the stock market losses or unexpected debts. Gerald had been careful with money, but things happened. Medical bills, perhaps. Investment failures. She was prepared to downsize, to live more modestly. She wasn't prepared for what came next. Approximately 6 months ago, your husband liquidated nearly all assets. The house has a reverse mortgage that will need to be addressed. The savings accounts are empty. The investment portfolio was cashed out. Nadine had felt Sophie's hand tighten around hers. "That's not possible. Where did the money go?" Marcus had looked genuinely pained. "I don't know. Mr. Ashcroft was not required to disclose that information to me. He simply instructed me to execute the will as written, which leaves you with one remaining asset." He'd slid a document across the desk. "A property deed. Plot 447, Thornwood County, Oregon. A cabin on 12 acres of forested land. I don't understand," Nadine had said, the paper trembling in her hands. Gerald never mentioned a cabin. According to the records, it's been in the Ashcroft family since 1889. Your husband inherited it from his father in 1985, 40 years. Gerald had owned this property for 40 years and never once mentioned it. Behind her, she'd heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Laughter. Quiet, quickly stifled, but unmistakable. She turned to find Lowell, Harlan and Victor sitting in the back of the office. They'd arrived just as the reading began, claiming they were there to support her, to help with any business matters that might arise. Now they sat with barely concealed smirks, exchanging knowing glances. Lowell had cleared his throat, composing his features into false concern. "A cabin in Thornwood County? That's quite remote, Nadine. Hardly accessible, especially in winter. Probably not worth much, maintenance-wise." Victor had nodded sympathetically. "If you'd like, we could handle the property for you. Take it off your hands. Save you the trouble of dealing with it." The offer had been too quick, too eager. Nadine was grieving, confused and angry, but she wasn't stupid. These men wanted something, and they wanted her to hand it over without question. "No, thank you," she'd said quietly. "I think I'd like to see it first." The silence that followed had been thick with tension. Then Victor had smiled that empty smile again. "Of course. Just know that the offer stands. Whenever you're ready." Sophie had driven her home, full of questions Nadine couldn't answer. Why would Gerald liquidate everything? Where had the money gone? What was so important about a falling-down cabin in the middle of nowhere? "Mom, this doesn't make sense. Dad was always so careful, so planned. He wouldn't just throw away your security." "I know, sweetheart. Do you want me to stay? Help you figure this out?" Nadine had squeezed her daughter's hand. "You have your own family, your own life. I'll manage this. But, Sophie, I need to do this myself. I need to understand what your father was thinking." After Sophie left, Nadine had wandered through the house, seeing it differently now. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, none of it was really hers anymore. The reverse mortgage meant the bank would take the house eventually. She'd have to move, downsize, rebuild at an age when she'd thought everything was settled. She'd found Gerald's study unchanged from the day he died. His desk still held stacks of papers, a calendar with appointments he'd never keep, a coffee cup with a dark ring at the bottom. She'd avoided this room, couldn't bear to sort through his things, to make real the permanence of his absence. But now she needed answers. She'd started with the desk drawers, finding the usual debris of a working life. Pens, paper clips, old business cards, files on timber contracts and property assessments. Nothing unusual. The bottom drawer stuck when she tried to open it. She'd pulled harder, and it finally gave way with a scrape of wood on wood. Inside, beneath a stack of folders, she'd found a leather-bound journal, the cover worn soft with age and handling. She'd opened it carefully, recognizing Gerald's handwriting on the first page. A date, June 12th, 1987. It's still there, watching, waiting. Father was right. Some doors should never be opened. Her hands had trembled as she turned the pages, finding entries scattered across years. Most were brief, cryptic. References to the burden and the watch, and keeping them away. The last entry was dated 1 week before his death. I failed to protect her from the truth. Forgive me, Nadine. She'd sat in his chair for a long time, the journal open in her lap, trying to understand what her husband had been carrying all these years. What secret had weighed on him so heavily that he'd destroyed their financial security to protect it, or to protect her from it? Outside, evening was falling. She'd made her decision then. Tomorrow, she would pack a bag and drive to Thornwood County. She would see this cabin, this mysterious inheritance that had replaced their comfortable retirement. She would find out what Gerald had been hiding, and why 3 men who barely concealed their greed were so desperate to take it from her. The next morning, she'd loaded her car with practical supplies. Warm clothes, a sleeping bag, her grandmother's old compass, bottled water, and non-perishable food. The journal went into her bag, along with her phone charger and a flashlight. She had no idea what condition the cabin would be in, but she'd learned long ago to prepare for the worst. The drive north took her out of Portland's comfortable suburbs and into the Cascade foothills. Traffic thinned as she left the interstate, following increasingly narrow roads into timber country. Towns became smaller, more scattered. Gas stations gave way to scattered houses and long stretches of dense pine forest. Thornwood County announced itself with a faded sign and a warning about winter road closures. The town itself, if you could call it that, consisted of a general store, a diner, and a volunteer fire station. She stopped at the diner for coffee and directions, sitting at the counter beneath mounted deer heads and faded photographs of logging crews. The waitress was somewhere in her 50s, weathered and efficient. She'd poured coffee without being asked, studying Nadine with open curiosity, passing through, looking for a property. Plot 447. The waitress had paused mid-pour, coffee sloshing into the saucer. The Ashcroft place? Yes, my husband's family owned it. Owned past tense. He passed away recently. The waitress had set down the pot, her expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to concern. I'm sorry for your loss. But I'll be straight with you. Folks don't go up there much anymore. Why not? A shrug. Just don't. Road's rough. Place is old. Been empty for years, near as anyone knows. How do I find it? The waitress had given her directions, sketched on a napkin. You sure about this? Getting dark earlier these days. Easy to get lost up there. I'm sure the final miles had been exactly as rough as warned. The logging road was barely maintained, rutted and overgrown. Her sedan bottomed out twice, scraping over rocks. Trees pressed in from both sides, branches scratching the windows. She'd begun to wonder if she'd taken a wrong turn when the cabin appeared through the mist. It was larger than she'd expected, and older. Not a rustic hunting cabin, but a full Victorian-era structure, sagging under decades of neglect. And carved eaves, a widow's walk on the roof, windows like dark eyes watching her approach. The porch steps groaned under her weight. The door was unlocked. It opened with a horror movie creak, revealing an interior frozen in time. Furniture from the 1940s, dust covering every surface like grey snow. Photographs on the mantel showed faces she'd never seen. A young Gerald, maybe 10 years old, standing stiffly beside an elderly man with a severe expression. A woman who looked strikingly like Nadine herself, though the photo had to be 60 years old, and in the center of the room, covered by a moth-eaten cloth, something large and rectangular. Nadine had approached it slowly, every instinct telling her to leave it covered, to walk away. But she'd come too far for cowardice now. She gripped the cloth and pulled. The cloth fell away, revealing a mirror. But not just any mirror. The frame was black stone, obsidian maybe, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the fading light. And the reflection, she'd stepped closer, frowning. The reflection showed her, but not quite right. The woman in the mirror looked younger, maybe 40, her hair still brown instead of silver. As Nadine watched, the reflection changed again, showing her at 25 on her wedding day, Then 67 as she was now, she'd reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the cold stone frame. The world had tilted. In her mind, she'd seen Gerald at 30, standing before this same mirror, backing away in terror. She'd heard a voice, ancient and certain. The women always see. The men only fear, then silence. Just Nadine and her own racing heartbeat, and the impossible mirror reflecting impossible things. She'd stepped back, her librarian's mind trying to categorize, to understand. Mirrors didn't show different ages. Mirrors didn't cause visions. This violated every natural law she understood, but it was real. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the air seemed heavy with waiting, with purpose. Gerald had known about this, had lived with this knowledge for decades, and she was beginning to understand why he'd never told her, why he'd spent their entire marriage keeping her away from this place. Behind the mirror, she'd found a hidden compartment, a seam in the wood paneling barely visible. Inside were letters, dozens of them bound with twine, all addressed to the Keeper of Thornwood. The dates ranged from 1889 to 1985. One letter bore Gerald's handwriting, unopened, with shaking hands. She'd broken the seal. Gerald's letter was dated 1 week before his death, written in the trembling hand of a man under great strain. My dearest Nadine, if you're reading this, then I've failed you. Failed to protect you from the truth I've carried since my father showed me this place in 1986. I thought I could break the chain, end the cycle by simply walking away. I was wrong. The Watchers were never meant to abandon their post. The three families, Brandt, Knox, Delane, they've been waiting. They've always been waiting. They're not business partners. They're descendants of the men who tried to claim what my grandfather protected. And now that I'm gone, they'll come for it. For you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you while I lived. The burden is yours now, whether you want it or not. What's sealed below must remain sealed. Trust the mirror. It shows truth, even when truth seems impossible. Protect it, Nadine. Protect what our family has guarded for over a century. The women always see clearly. You will understand what I never could. Nadine read the letter 3 times, each word adding weight to the questions pressing against her skull. Watchers, sealed below, protected for over a century. The phrases meant nothing and everything at once. She turned back to the mirror, studying it more carefully now. The obsidian frame was covered in carved symbols, geometric patterns that reminded her of petroglyphs she'd seen in museum displays. Native American, possibly, but also something else. Something older or stranger. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, though she hadn't touched it. Her reflection blurred, then reformed into something that made her breath catch. She saw herself, but the background was different. Not the dusty cabin, but this same room, clean and bright, filled with people. Gerald stood beside her younger self, both of them smiling at someone outside the frame. Sophia's a baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket. The image shifted. Now she saw Gerald alone in this room, 30 years old maybe, standing exactly where she stood now. His face was stark with fear, backing away from the mirror as if it might reach out and grab him. She could almost hear his thoughts. This is wrong. This shouldn't exist. I have to get away. Another shift. An elderly man, Gerald's father, she recognized him from the mantel photograph, touching the mirror's frame with reverence and sorrow. Tears tracked down his weathered face. He was saying something, lips moving silently. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. The vision stopped. Nadine found herself staring at her own 70-year-old face again, breathing hard, her palm pressed against the wall for balance. What are you? She whispered to the mirror. It didn't answer, but the symbols on the frame seemed to glow faintly in the dying light, filtering through the dirty windows. She photographed them with her phone. No signal this far out, but the camera still worked, thinking she might research them later, find some explanation in her library's collection of anthropology texts. Her hand brushed against the frame again, this time on the side where it met the wall. She felt a gap, a hollow space. Reaching into the darkness, her fingers closed on something hard and cold. Metal, she pulled it free. A key, heavy and old, rust-spotted but solid. The teeth were strangely shaped, like nothing she'd seen in 40 years of old houses and antique furniture. The symbols from the mirror frame were etched into the key's head. Gerald's letter had mentioned something sealed below. She looked down at the floorboards, old wood darkened with age. Could there be a basement, a cellar? Before she could search further, she heard it. The distant rumble of engines on the logging road. Nadine moved to the window, peering through the grime. Headlights cut through the gathering dusk, 2 vehicles approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized the make and model. Expensive SUVs, the kind that looked rugged but had never seen real dirt until today. They'd come, just as Gerald warned. The 3 families who'd been waiting. Her first instinct was to run, to get in her car and leave before they blocked her in. But that would mean abandoning the answers she'd driven 3 hours to find. And something in her, the part that had stood up to bullying parents and aggressive administrators, that had built a career on refusing to be intimidated, made her stay. She pocketed the key and moved away from the window. If they wanted in, they'd have to ask nicely. The vehicles stopped in front of the cabin. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps on the porch, deliberate and heavy. Then a knock, sharp and authoritative. Mrs. Ashcroft. Victor Delane's smooth voice carried through the door. "We need to talk about your inheritance." She waited a long moment before answering. Let them understand she wasn't frightened, wasn't going to be rushed. The doors unlocked, Mr. Delane. They entered in a cloud of expensive cologne and barely suppressed eagerness. Victor led, followed by Lowell and Harlan. All 3 carried equipment, metal detectors, a surveying theodolite, ropes and climbing gear. This wasn't a social visit. They'd come prepared to explore. "What a surprise finding you here," Victor said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We thought you might take longer to visit." "I don't waste time," Nadine replied evenly. "Oh, what do you really want?" Lowell stepped forward, his patience clearly thinner than Victor's. "We need access to this property, Mrs. Ashcroft. Your husband made certain promises before he died. Verbal agreements about mineral rights and surveying access. Show me the paperwork. It was a gentleman's agreement." "Then it's not binding," she interrupted. "This property is mine." "You're trespassing." Harlan's nervous energy ratcheted up several notches. His eyes kept darting to the mirror behind her, now visible with the cloth removed. "You uncovered it," he breathed. "You actually uncovered it." The other 2 men tensed, seeing it for the first time. Something passed between them, alarm, hunger, calculation. "Cover that immediately," Victor snapped, his smooth facade cracking. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then perhaps you should explain it," Nadine said, not moving. "Tell me why 3 wealthy businessmen are so interested in a falling-down cabin 3 hours from anywhere." They exchanged glances, some silent negotiation occurring. Finally, Victor approached her, hands open in a gesture of reasonableness. "Mrs. Ashcroft, Nadine, there's something valuable on this property. Your husband's grandfather discovered it in 1889, a geological anomaly, possibly fragments from a meteorite impact. Such materials can be worth millions to collectors and researchers. We've been waiting decades for the opportunity to properly survey and extract samples. Gerald refused to allow it, bound by some outdated family tradition. But you're a practical woman. You could use the money, especially now. We're prepared to offer you $200,000 for unlimited access to the property." It was a good lie, smooth and logical. But Nadine had read Gerald's letter. She knew about the watches, about what was sealed below, about the burden her husband had carried. These men weren't after meteorite fragments. They wanted something else, something that Gerald had died protecting. $350, Victor amended when she didn't respond. "And that's more than generous for a property this remote." "I'm not interested in selling access to anything," Nadine said. "Not until I understand exactly what's here." Lowell's temper finally broke. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This is bigger than your husband's paranoid superstitions. There's something under this cabin that could change everything, and you're standing in the way out of stubborn ignorance." The outburst confirmed what she'd suspected. They knew about something beneath the cabin, something Gerald had kept from them for decades. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, using the teacher voice that had quelled rowdy lunchrooms and parent-teacher confrontations, "you're going to leave now. Come back tomorrow morning with actual legal documentation of any claims you think you have." Until then, you're trespassing on my property." Victor tried once more, his voice dropping to something almost threatening. "Don't do anything foolish, Mrs. Ashcroft. This cabin has a history of accidents. People getting lost in the woods, falling through rotted floors. It would be a shame if something happened to you out here alone." The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Sophie's worried face flashed through Nadine's mind. Her daughter would be devastated if anything happened. But giving in to threats would solve nothing, would only delay the inevitable confrontation. "I'll take my chances," she said firmly. "Good night, gentlemen." They left reluctantly, Victor's farewell carrying a warning edge. "We'll be back at sunrise. Think carefully about what you're protecting and why." Nadine watched their taillights disappear down the logging road, then locked the cabin door and wedged a chair under the handle. Her hands were shaking now that they were gone, adrenaline draining away to leave her feeling her full 67 years. She needed to understand what was under this cabin before they returned. Needed to know what Gerald had protected, what had driven him to destroy their financial security to keep it safe. She pulled out the rusted key, studying it in the lamplight. Gerald's journal had mentioned a descent. 12 steps down, then the turn. The key only works when the mirror shows truth. She approached the obsidian mirror once more, her reflection steady now. "Show me the truth," she whispered. Feeling foolish but determined, the surface rippled. Her reflection blurred and reformed into something else, a cutaway view of the cabin itself, as if she were seeing through the walls and floors. She could see herself standing in the main room. Below, rendered in ghostly clarity, was a hidden staircase descending into darkness. The entrance was under the hearthstone. The vision faded, but she understood. She moved to the stone fireplace, examining the hearth carefully. The stones were fitted tightly, mortared in place, but one, the cornerstone, sat slightly askew. She worked her fingers around its edges, prying and pulling. It came loose with a grinding of stone on stone. Behind it, carved into the foundation, a keyhole dark with age and disuse. The rusted key slid in perfectly, as if it had been waiting over a century for this moment. She turned it with both hands, putting her full weight into the motion. Something deep in the walls groaned and shifted. Ancient mechanisms engaged. The hearthstone began to move, sliding aside on hidden rails to reveal a descending stairway carved from living rock. Cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of earth and time and something else. Something that made the hair on her arms stand up. Nadine stood at the edge of the opening, flashlight in hand, staring down into the darkness where her husband's secret waited. 12 steps down, then the turn. Gerald's journal had said. She took a breath and began to descend. The stairs were steep, each step worn smooth by generations of feet. Nadine counted as she descended, her flashlight beam cutting through absolute darkness. 1, 2, 3. The walls were natural stone, cold and damp under her free hand. 7, 8, 9. The air grew colder with each step, carrying that strange smell she couldn't quite identify, not decay, but something ancient and preserved. 12 steps, just as Gerald's journal had promised. The passage turned sharply right, and she followed it deeper. The walls here showed evidence of human work, timber reinforcements, symbols carved into the rock that matched those on the mirror upstairs. They seemed to glow faintly in her flashlight beam, though that might have been a trick of the dancing light and her exhausted mind. 30 more steps down. The passage opened into a chamber, roughly 15 feet square, carved from bedrock. A natural shelf in the wall held a single object, a cloth-bound book, its leather cover cracked with age. Nadine lifted it carefully, treating it with the reverence she'd give any century-old text. The cover read, "Record of the Watchers, begun 1889, by order of Magnus Ashcroft, First Guardian." She opened it, pages crackling softly. The first entry was written in careful, formal script, June 17, 1889. "I, Magnus Ashcroft, do hereby accept the sacred duty of guardian, as instructed by Sequili of the Kalapuya people." Last of her line. What lies sealed below must remain so, until humanity proves itself worthy of the knowledge contained within. The Brandt, Knox and Delane families have been denied access, though they provided labor in the ceiling. They saw the light and will forever covet it. The Ashcroft bloodline alone must stand watch, blood to blood, generation to generation, until the time of revealing. Nadine flipped through the pages, seeing entries in different handwriting as guardianship passed from father to son. Magnus, then Theodore, then Robert, Gerald's father. Each entry followed a similar pattern: dates, brief observations, confirmations that all remained secure. But some entries were marked in red ink, noting incidents. 1903, tremor felt. Southern wall inspected and reinforced. All remained secure. 1924, voices heard for 3 consecutive nights. Vigil kept. Silence restored. 1967, major incident during inspection. Father injured, required hospital stay. Seal integrity confirmed. The entries became less frequent after 1970, Robert Ashcroft's handwriting growing increasingly shaky. His final entry was dated 1985. Cannot continue. Age and injury make the descent impossible. Gerald must take the burden, though I fear for him. Gerald's first entry came in 1986, his familiar handwriting stark against the page. Father has shown me the truth below. I understand now why he was always afraid, why he drank, why he never spoke of it. But I am not strong enough for this burden. His final entry, dated 1987. I have made a decision. This watch ends with me. Let the Brandt, Knox and Delane families rot in hell. I will give Nadine and Sophie a normal life, even if it means abandoning my post. The seal will hold without a watcher. It must. 38 years of silence after that. 38 years of Gerald living with his choice, watching the 3 families circle, waiting for him to die so they could finally claim what they'd coveted since 1889. Nadine closed the ledger, feeling the weight of 5 generations of men who'd carried this secret. And now it had fallen to her, a 67-year-old widow who just wanted to understand why her husband had left her with nothing but questions. She noticed another passage leading deeper, cruder and narrower than the one she'd descended. The symbols here were different, not carved, but painted in something dark that might have been ochre, or might have been rust, or might have been something she didn't want to think about. The air from this passage felt heavy, expectant, as though something was waiting just beyond the reach of her light. A sound from above froze her in place. Footsteps in the cabin, multiple people moving around, their voices carrying down through the stone stairway. She found it. The hearth is open. Harlan's voice high with excitement and fear. Get down there. We're out of time. Lowell cold and commanding they'd come back. Couldn't wait until morning. Nadine backed away from the deeper passage, looking for other exits. There were none. The chamber had only 2 openings. The stairs she'd descended, and the dark passage leading to whatever her husband had tried to protect. She was trapped. Flashlight beams bounced off the walls above. Footsteps on the stone stairs, descending quickly. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the watcher's ledger to her chest, and waited. Victor Delane appeared first, his expensive suit jacket replaced by something more practical, his smooth facade cracking under obvious stress. Mrs. Ashcroft, please be reasonable. We don't want anyone getting hurt. Then you'd better start telling me the truth, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Lowell and Harlan emerged behind Victor. They were carrying more than flashlights now. Lowell had a crowbar, Harlan a sledgehammer. Tools for breaking things open, for forcing their way past barriers. Victor held something else, an old photograph, edges yellowed with age. He showed it to her, the cabin in 1889, a group of people standing outside. Young Magnus Ashcroft, solemn-faced and thin. 3 other men, who could only be the original Brandt, Knox and Delane. And a woman, elderly, dark-eyed, commanding in her bearing despite her age. My great-great-grandmother, Victor said, tapping the woman's face. Soquili. She found it first, you know. Found the opening after a landslide in the winter of 1888. Your husband's family stole what was rightfully ours. Nadine studied the photograph more carefully. The woman's posture, the way the men stood in relation to her. This wasn't a woman who'd been robbed. This was a woman in control, making decisions. That's not what happened, is it? Nadine said quietly. She worked with Magnus, not against him. She chose him to continue the watch, Lowell interrupted, impatient as always. This is wasting time. The seal has been weakened for 38 years. Every day without a watcher, it degrades further. We need to access what's below before what? Nadine demanded. What exactly are you protecting? Or coveting? The three men exchanged glances. Finally Harlan spoke, his nervous energy barely contained. There's a chamber beyond this one. Something old was sealed inside it long before Europeans arrived. The local tribes wouldn't go near this ground. Called it the place where sky fell. Victor continued, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. In 1889, my ancestor James Delane was surveying for the railroad. He found an opening in the rock after a landslide. Inside he saw light, not firelight or lamplight. Something else, light that moved, that seemed alive. He touched it, Lowell added, and it changed him. Gave him knowledge, showed him things that would happen, things that had happened. He became wealthy overnight, made investments that couldn't fail. But it also drove him half mad. He couldn't stop talking about the light, about what it showed him. Harlan picked up the story. Delane brought our grandfathers, Brant and Knox. They came here together, tried to extract the source of the light. But it was behind a stone door, covered in symbols they couldn't read. They worked for weeks, couldn't breach it. Then Soquili came, Victor said. The old woman. She said the door was there for a reason. That the light was a fragment of something larger, something that fell from the sky centuries ago. She said it showed truth, but truth that would break minds unprepared to receive it. That it should stay sealed until humanity was ready. Nadine absorbed this, her librarian's mind working to categorize and understand. It sounded like legend, like the kind of story that grew in the telling. But the mirror upstairs had shown her impossible things, had given her visions of the past, had revealed the hidden stairway. Something in this place defied rational explanation. She pulled the painted stone from the wall niche, examining the ancient handprints in ochre. This was a sacred site long before your families arrived. Long before the Ashcrofts, Victor nodded reluctantly. Soquili was the last of her people. Disease and displacement had destroyed her tribe. She'd been a guardian for the site, as her ancestors had been for 20 generations. But she was dying, childless. She needed someone to continue the watch after she was gone. Magnus Ashcroft was different from us, Lowell admitted. He listened to her, respected her knowledge. He agreed to take the burden, to keep us away from what was sealed below. She taught him the rituals, the signs, the words that would maintain the barrier. Then she sealed the inner door with him as witness. Our grandfathers were furious, Harlan added. Threatened lawsuits, violence, but Magnus made them a deal, work with him, prosper together. The land here was rich in timber and minerals. He'd share everything except access to the chamber. They agreed, became wealthy men building Cascade Timber together. But they never stopped wanting what was behind that door. The pieces were falling into place now. The company Gerald had worked for all those years, Cascade Timber, wasn't just his employer. It was a partnership forged in 1889 between 4 families, 3 of whom had spent over a century coveting what the 4th protected, the knowledge. Harlan whispered, his voice shaking. The power. Delane wrote that in one moment he understood everything, the nature of time, of reality itself. Imagine what we could do with that understanding. Nadine saw it clearly now. Not greed for gold or land, but something more intoxicating. Absolute knowledge. The promise of understanding everything, of seeing past and future with equal clarity. It was the serpent's offer in Eden, the hubris that toppled empires. Gerald was right to walk away, she said firmly. Right to break the chain. Whatever's down there should stay sealed. Lowell's patience finally snapped completely. You don't have a choice anymore. Gerald's death broke the bloodline watch. The seal has been unattended for over a month. We've seen the signs. Tremors, lights in the sky above this mountain. The barrier is failing. Either we access it properly with control, or it breaks free on its own terms. A sound echoed from the deeper passage, low and resonant, like stone grinding against stone, or something massive breathing in a vast space. All 4 of them froze, the argument forgotten in the face of that unnatural sound. When it faded, the silence felt heavier than before. "It knows we're here," Holland breathed. The grinding sound had shaken something loose in all of them. Even Lowell's cold confidence had cracked, replaced by something closer to fear. Nadine felt it too, a primal understanding that they were standing at the threshold of something that had waited a very long time. "Show me," she said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "Show me this door, this light you've been coveting." Victor hesitated. "It's not safe, not without preparation. People who approach unprepared, they see things. Their minds can't process it properly." Nadine thought of the mirror upstairs, the visions it had shown her. Gerald at 30, terrified and backing away. His father weeping. "I've already seen impossible things today. Show me what my husband protected." The men conferred in whispers, a silent negotiation, playing out in glances and slight gestures. Finally, Victor opened his pack and produced a small wooden box. Very old, the surface carved with protective symbols that matched those on the walls. "This was Sequeli's," he explained, opening it carefully. Inside, nestled in faded cloth, was a copper bracelet green with patina. Magnus wrote that she wore this when approaching the seal. "It grounds the mind somehow, provides clarity. Without it, the light overwhelms, shows too much too fast. We've tested it over the years, when we could sneak down here during Gerald's absences." "Give it to me," Nadine said, extending her hand. Lowell objected immediately. "Why should you wear it?" "You don't know what you're looking for, because I'm the only one here not consumed by greed," Nadine interrupted. "I'll tell you what I see truthfully. Can any of you say the same?" The challenge landed. They had no good counter, and they knew it. Victor placed the bracelet on her wrist. It was cold at first, then warmed quickly to her skin. She felt a subtle shift in the air around her, as though a weight she hadn't noticed before had suddenly lifted. The oppressive feeling in the chamber lessened. They entered the deeper passage single file, Nadine in front, wearing the bracelet. The men followed, their earlier confidence replaced by obvious unease. The passage sloped downward at a steep angle, walls narrowing until Nadine had to turn sideways in places. The painted symbols became more frequent, circles, spirals, handprints in ochre and white. She recognized some from her library's collection of books on Native American petroglyphs. The passage opened suddenly into a cathedral-like cavern. Their lights barely reached the ceiling, which was lost in shadow somewhere far above. Stalactites hung like frozen waterfalls, and the floor was smooth stone, worn by centuries of underground water flow. And there, across the chamber, was the door. It wasn't made of wood or metal. It was stone, perfectly smooth, seamlessly set into the cavern wall as if it had grown there naturally. 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, covered entirely in carved symbols that made her eyes ache to look at directly. Some matched those in the passage, ancient and organic. Others were different, geometric and precise, almost mathematical in their arrangement. Around the door's edges, light leaked through, a faint blue-white glow that pulsed slowly, rhythmically. Like a heartbeat made visible, Nadine approached, the bracelet growing warmer on her wrist. Behind her, the 3 men hung back, as if some invisible barrier prevented them from getting closer. She could hear whispering, not with her ears but somewhere deeper, in the part of her mind that processed dreams and intuition. Not words but impressions, curiosity, loneliness, patience. Whatever was beyond this door was aware, had been aware for a very long time. She reached out, stopping her hand inches from the stone surface. The symbols seemed to shift under her gaze, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost made sense, like words in a language she'd once known but forgotten. "Do you see it?" Victor's voice was strained with want.
"The light?"
"Yes," Nadine whispered. "What does it show you?" She paused, trying to articulate the impressions flowing into her mind. "Nothing, everything. It's not showing me anything yet." "It's asking permission." Lowell stepped forward eagerly. "Then give it permission. Touch the door, let it show you." Nadine pulled her hand back, understanding crystallizing. "No, that's exactly what I shouldn't do. This isn't something to be taken. It must be offered." Sequeli understood that. Magnus understood it. You three never have. She turned to face them, her back to the sealed door. Gerald was right to walk away. Not because the responsibility was too great, but because he knew you'd never stop pushing. Never stop trying to break the seal. He thought without a watcher, you'd eventually give up. Harlan shook his head, nervous energy making his voice crack. He thought wrong. We've spent 38 years preparing, studying the symbols, consulting experts in ancient languages and archaeology. We know how to open it now. We were just waiting for him to die, for the bloodline watch to end. The truth clicked into place with sickening clarity. His heart attack. It wasn't natural, was it? The men's silence was confirmation enough. Victor's voice carried defensive justification. He was dying anyway, cancer. Had maybe 6 months left but wouldn't tell anyone. We just accelerated the timeline. Spared him the suffering. Rage flooded through Nadine, hot and clarifying. You murdered my husband. We liberated the future, Lowell said coldly. And now, Mrs. Ashcroft, you have a choice. Help us open the door properly, using whatever rituals or permissions it requires. Or we do it by force, and you can't stop us. Nadine looked at each of them in turn, seeing what decades of obsession had done. They'd rotted from within, consumed by want. She thought of Gerald, carrying this burden silently, dying alone with his secrets to protect her and Sophie from exactly this moment. She touched the copper bracelet, felt its grounding warmth. An idea was forming, risky but possible. If I help you, you'll destroy yourselves, she said quietly. The light will show you truth, yes, but not truth you can bear, Victor scoffed. We're prepared. We're not like the others who failed. We've studied this for decades. Nadine almost pitied them. No, you're exactly like the others. That's the problem. She turned back to the door, decision made. If they were going to force this, she would at least ensure they understood what they were asking for. She would make them see the truth they claimed to want so badly. She placed her palm flat against the stone. The symbols flared brilliant white. Light flooded the chamber so bright that the men cried out and shielded their eyes. But Nadine, protected by Soquili's bracelet, could look directly into it, and in that light, she saw everything, not mystical visions or spiritual revelations. Data, pure information flowing at impossible speed. Mathematical formulas she couldn't understand, but somehow comprehended anyway. Star charts showing Earth from perspectives she'd never imagined. Geological surveys of terrain that didn't match any current continent. This wasn't supernatural. It wasn't divine. It was scientific. It was a message, and it had been waiting 12,000 years to be properly received. She saw Earth as it had been. Land masses in different configurations. Ice sheets covering regions now temperate. Seas where mountains now stood. A timestamp appeared in her mind, in symbols she shouldn't be able to read, but could, approximately 12,000 years before present. A civilization had existed here, human but advanced far beyond current technology. They had detected something in space, approaching, an object damaged, breaking apart as it entered Earth's atmosphere. One fragment had landed here, in these mountains. The ancient civilization had built this chamber, carved the door, installed the warning system, not to contain the fragment's power, but to warn future inhabitants about what it signified. The fragment itself was harmless, inert, but it was broadcasting, sending a signal into deep space, calling to the main vessel from which it had broken. And that vessel was still coming, had been coming for 12 millennia, slow and patient and inevitable. The door wasn't sealing something in. It was a database, a warning system, a gift. The light was a holographic interface designed to transfer critical information to minds capable of receiving it. But human minds, even 12,000 years later, still weren't quite structured correctly for direct transfer. Without proper preparation, the bracelet, the rituals, it showed too much too fast. Overwhelming consciousness, with data it couldn't properly categorize. James Delane had touched it in 1889 without protection. It had given him predictive knowledge because it showed him patterns, mathematical probability calculations, the deep structure of cause and effect. But it had also damaged him, fragmented his thinking, made him obsessed with receiving more. That obsession had passed to his descendants, and to the Brants and Knoxes who witnessed his transformation. Nadine pulled her hand away, gasping. The light faded back to its subtle pulse. She turned to the three men, who were staring at her with desperate hunger. "What did you see?" Victor demanded. "Tell us!" She steadied herself against the stone, her mind still processing the flood of information. "It's not what you think. None of this is... There's no mystical power here, no cosmic wisdom to exploit. It's a warning, a message left by people who died out millennia ago." She explained what she'd seen, the ancient civilization, the approaching vessel, the fragment beacon. The men listened with expressions shifting from excitement to confusion to growing horror. "That's absurd," Lowell said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ancient astronauts?" "No," Nadine corrected firmly. "Ancient humans. Humans who achieved more than we have now, then were wiped out by the very thing heading our way." Harlan's voice shook. "How long do we have?" Nadine had seen the trajectory calculations, the vessel's diminishing velocity as it crossed the vast emptiness between stars. "Based on what the system showed me, maybe 50 years, maybe 100. The data is 12,000 years old. The vessel's path could have changed." Victor looked at the door with new understanding, his hunger replaced by something closer to fear. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to document this, get scientists here, governments, military, universities, and tell them what?" Lowell's legal mind engaged. "That we murdered Gerald Ashcroft to access a cave. We'd be arrested before anyone listened. The weight of their actions settled on them visibly. They'd wanted power, knowledge, advantage. Instead, they'd found responsibility they couldn't bear and guilt for a murder that had accomplished nothing." Harlan sat heavily on the stone floor, his nervous energy finally exhausted. "We killed him for this, for a warning we can't even share." Nadine felt a flicker of satisfaction, watching them finally understand consequences. But the satisfaction was brief. The larger problem remained. Something was coming to Earth, and no one knew. The fragment here was broadcasting its location. When the main vessel arrived, it would come to these mountains first, she thought methodically, decades of organizing information guiding her thoughts. The Guardian families weren't protecting the fragment itself. They were protecting knowledge of what it means. Sequili understood that humanity wasn't ready for this truth. Magnus agreed, and each generation maintained the secret until Gerald, who saw another option, let the secret die with him. Maybe in another generation or two, humanity would be mature enough to handle it. Maybe we'd find the vessel ourselves, on our own terms. "But we've disrupted that plan," Victor said slowly. "Open the chamber, access the interface. The system knows we're here now." As if responding to his words, the light pulsed brighter. The symbols on the door began to move, flowing like water, rearranging into new patterns. Nadine stepped forward, the bracelet warm on her wrist. She could read them now. The database had taught her its language. "It's not just a warning anymore," she whispered, ice forming in her stomach. "It's an activation sequence." The chamber trembled. Dust fell from the stalactites above, pattering on the stone floor like rain. The symbols on the door moved faster now, cycling through configurations that Nadine's newly educated mind recognized as system diagnostics, status checks, preparation sequences. "Activation?" Lowell's voice cracked. "What's activating?" Nadine read the flowing symbols, her heart sinking with each new understanding. "The fragment. It's been dormant, conserving energy for 12,000 years. Waiting for contact from someone with the right biological markers." "What markers?" Harlan whispered. "An Ashcroft. Someone whose bloodline carries genetic sequences from Sequili's people, who were descended from the original Guardians. From the ancient civilization itself," she understood now with terrible clarity. Gerald had known this, had understood that his bloodline was the key, the activation trigger built into the system by people who'd wanted to ensure only their descendants could access the knowledge when ready. That's why he'd married Nadine, had a daughter, diluted the genetic markers through intermarriage, hoping to break the connection. But Nadine had touched the door. And while she was an Ashcroft only by marriage, Sophie carried the genes directly through Gerald. The system had recognized the bloodline through Nadine's connection to her daughter. Recognition by proxy. And now it was sending a signal. Not the passive beacon the fragment had maintained for millennia, but an active transmission, telling the approaching vessel, "We're ready. We've received the message. Come home. Can you stop it?" Victor demanded. "Reverse the activation." Nadine studied the symbols, seeing options branch and flow like a decision tree. "Yes, but it requires another Ashcroft to confirm the reversal. The system needs consensus, a built-in safeguard against accidents. It needs Sophie." The three men pulled out their phones simultaneously. No signal this deep in the mountain. They would have to go above ground. How long before the signal fully transmits? Lowell asked, already moving toward the passage. Nadine read the countdown displayed in alien numerals that she now understood perfectly. 72 hours from first activation. We have 3 days to bring Sophie here, or the signal completes, and we wait to see what comes. Another tremor shook the chamber, stronger this time. Small rocks fell from the ceiling. One struck Harlan's shoulder, making him yelp. The fragment was waking up after 12 millennia of sleep, ancient systems engaging, power building. "We need to get above ground," Nadine said firmly. "Now!" They scrambled through the narrow passage, the grinding sound following them. It was rhythmic now, like massive machinery coming to life deep in the earth. Nadine moved quickly for a woman her age, adrenaline lending her strength. The men struggled to keep pace, their earlier confidence replaced by obvious fear. They reached the main chamber, then climbed the stairs to the cabin. Cold night air hit them like a blessing. Nadine gulped it down, her lungs aching from the dust and exertion. Around them, the forest was unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing had fled the tremors radiating from beneath the cabin. Victor had his phone out the moment they cleared the door, pacing on the porch as he dialed. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. On the 3rd attempt, he left a message, his smooth voice finally showing genuine stress. "Sophie, this is Victor Delane, your father's business partner. There's an emergency with the cabin property your mother inherited. Call her immediately at this number. It's urgent." He provided Nadine's number and hung up. Lowell and Harlan were having a heated argument about strategy, about whether to tell Sophie the truth or manufacture some more believable urgency. Nadine interrupted them. "I'll call her myself." She pulled out her phone, hands steadier than she felt, and dialed her daughter's number. Sophie answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mom, are you okay? I've been worried. Sweetheart, I need you to come to the cabin. Now. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the absolute latest." The sleep cleared from Sophie's voice instantly. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Are those men threatening you?" How to explain without sounding completely insane? Nadine tried. "Do you remember the dreams you had as a child? The ones about a cabin and an old woman?" Long silence. When Sophie spoke again, her voice had changed, become guarded. "You told me those were just dreams, that I had an active imagination. I was wrong. They were memories, genetic memories from your father's bloodline, going back thousands of years. Sophie, I know how this sounds, but I need you to trust me. What did you find in that cabin, Mom? Something that explains everything your father kept from us, and something that only you and I can fix together." Sophie's husband, Dean, spoke in the background, muffled and concerned. Then Sophie came back on the line. "I can be there by tomorrow afternoon. It's a 5-hour drive, longer with the kids. Don't bring the children," Nadine said quickly, urgently. "Please, Sophie. This isn't safe for them. How unsafe are we talking?" Nadine glanced at Victor, Lowell, and Harlan, 3 men who'd murdered her husband and were now her unwilling allies in preventing something worse. "I'm with the 3 men who killed your father. And we're all trying to prevent something catastrophic." Sharp intake of breath. "Mom, get out of there right now. I'm calling the police." "No. Sophie, listen to me. The police can't help with this. Your father died protecting a secret that's been in his family for over a century. If you don't come here, that secret becomes everyone's problem." She could hear her daughter's rapid breathing, the internal struggle between rationality and trust. Finally, "Okay, I'm coming. Alone. Tell me the exact location." Nadine provided the coordinates, described the logging road, the landmarks. "And Sophie?" "Back that drawing." "What drawing?" "The one from when you were 6. The cabin. You know which one I mean." Quiet acknowledgement. "I know, I'll bring it." They ended the call. Nadine's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline beginning to fade. Victor had been listening to every word. "Genetic memories?" he asked. "Is that real?" "The system showed me," Nadine explained, too tired to obfuscate. So Queely's people carried information in their DNA, not conscious knowledge but impressions, instincts, dreams, passed down through generations like physical traits. Sophie has those markers. She's dreamed of this place her whole life without understanding why. Harlan was pacing, his nervous energy back in full force. "Will the system accept her? How can we know?" Nadine didn't know for certain, but she had faith in the careful design of that ancient interface. The people who'd built it had been human, had understood human nature. They wouldn't leave something this important to chance. They would have built in redundancies, multiple pathways to success. The night dragged on with painful slowness. They took shifts watching the hearth opening, listening to the grinding sounds that continued to emanate from below. The sounds were growing louder, more frequent. At one point, the entire cabin shuddered, sending books tumbling from shelves and cracking plaster in the walls. At dawn, Nadine made coffee on the ancient stove, surprised to find that the propane still worked. The normalcy of the act, measuring grounds, waiting for water to boil, helped ground her in reality. She was a 67-year-old widow making coffee in a mountain cabin. The impossible things beneath the floor didn't change that basic truth. She took Gerald's journal from her bag and read it more thoroughly, finding entries she'd missed in her initial scan. One made her pause, dated September 1986. Sophie had the dream again. "Third time this week." She drew another picture at school, exactly like the others. She's never seen the cabin, but she draws it perfectly. She draws the woman too, Mother's description of Sequili, exact in every detail. "I think I'm making a mistake keeping this from them. But I can't bear to burden Sophie with this knowledge. Let her have a normal life. Let her be free." Nadine's anger at Gerald softened slightly. He'd been trying to protect them, making what he thought was the right choice. The wrong choice, ultimately, but made from love rather than cowardice. By mid-morning, the tremors were constant. Small objects fell from shelves regularly. The mirror showed images without being asked, flashing through scenes like a slideshow. The approaching vessel growing incrementally closer. Sophie's car on the highway, speeding north. The 3 men years younger, sitting in a coffee shop, plotting. Gerald accepting a cup, not seeing Victor's hand add something to it when he looked away. Nadine forced herself to watch that last vision completely. Forced the 3 men to watch it too, calling them over to witness what they'd done. Gerald clutching his chest, understanding too late, his face going grey. His last thought visible somehow in the mirror's reflection. Nadine will be safe now. They'll leave her alone. Harlan turned away and vomited in the corner. Lowell's face was stone, but tears tracked slowly down his weathered cheeks. Victor just stared, hollow-eyed at the image of his own hand committing murder. "We can't undo it," he whispered. "No," Nadine agreed, her voice hard. "But you can face it. And when this is over, when we've fixed what you broke, you can turn yourselves in. Confess everything. Give Gerald's death some meaning." They nodded, broken men accepting the justice they'd avoided for too long. Noon came and went. Then 1 o'clock. At 1:47 p.m., they heard an engine on the logging road. Nadine went to the porch, her heart hammering. Silver sedan appeared through the trees, bouncing over the rough terrain. "Sophie." The car stopped and Nadine's daughter stepped out. At 41, Sophie looked so much like Gerald. The same practical bearing, the same careful way of assessing a situation before acting. But she had Nadine's eyes, and right now those eyes were filled with fear and determination in equal measure. They met halfway between the car and the cabin, embracing fiercely. Nadine held her daughter tight, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her. "Thank you for coming," Nadine whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." Sophie pulled back, studying her mother's face with concern. "Tell me everything." From the beginning, I need to understand what's happening. They went inside. The three men stood awkwardly to one side, and Nadine saw Sophie's expression harden as she recognized them from the funeral. But she said nothing, waiting for her mother to speak. Nadine told her everything. The fragment, the ancient civilization, the warning system, the activation sequence, the genetic connection through Gerald's bloodline, the dreams Sophie had experienced all her life, the countdown that was ticking away beneath their feet. Sophie listened without interrupting, her teacher's mind organizing the information, looking for the logic beneath the impossibility. When Nadine finished, Sophie sat quietly for a long moment. Then she produced a rolled piece of paper from her bag, the childhood drawing, carefully preserved. She unrolled it on the dusty table. There was the cabin, rendered in crayon by a 6-year-old hand. Every detail correct, the Victorian eaves, the widow's walk, even the arrangement of windows. And in front of the cabin, a woman, dark-haired, elderly, strong-featured. She didn't look like anyone Sophie could have seen in photographs or on television. She looked exactly like the woman in the 1889 photograph Victor had shown them. I always felt like I was remembering. Not imagining, Sophie said quietly. Like part of me had been here before. Nadine nodded. Part of you has. Part of all of us. The ancient civilization that built the warning system. They're our ancestors. Yours mine through Sequeli's line. They knew they were dying, but they hoped humanity would survive, would eventually be ready to receive their warning. Sophie absorbed this, then straightened her shoulders in a gesture Nadine recognized, the same one she'd used 1,000 times before facing a difficult task. "Or what do you need me to do?" Nadine explained the deactivation sequence as she understood it from the symbols she'd read. 2 Ashcrofts, both touching the door, both consenting to shut down the active signal. It would reset the system to dormancy, buy humanity more time to prepare. Maybe another generation, maybe 2, before the decision had to be made again. Sophie looked at the 3 men standing uncomfortably in the corner. Her voice was cold when she spoke. "You killed my father." "Yes," Victor said simply. "No excuses, no justifications this time. Will you turn yourselves in after this is done?" "Yes," all 3 answered together. Sophie nodded curtly. "Then let's finish this." They descended together, mother and daughter, with the 3 men following. The stairs were harder for Sophie, who hadn't built up the familiarity Nadine had gained from multiple trips. But she moved carefully, one hand on the wall, counting the steps just as Nadine had. The passages felt different now. The air was charged, electric, as if a storm was building underground. The symbols on the walls pulsed with faint light, no longer requiring flashlights to see. The ancient systems were fully awake, power flowing through circuits carved in stone 12,000 years ago. When they entered the cavern and Sophie saw the sealed door for the first time, she stopped. Her breath caught. "It's exactly like the dreams," she whispered. "I've seen this. Over and over since I was little." The door's light was brilliant now, pulsing like a strobe. The countdown was visible in the flowing symbols. 11 hours remaining until the signal reached full strength and transmitted into deep space. 11 hours until they either stopped it or committed humanity to first contact on terms they couldn't control. Sophie stared at the door with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful." Nadine placed Sequeli's copper bracelet on her daughter's wrist. "This will protect you. Ground your mind." "Are you ready?" Sophie took her mother's hand, squeezed it firmly. Together, they stepped forward to face humanity's ancient legacy. But as they approached, Nadine felt something wrong. The interface was reacting strangely, the symbols shifting in patterns that didn't match what she'd seen before. Confused, uncertain, she placed her left palm on the stone. Sophie mirrored her, placing her right palm beside her mother's. The symbols flared bright, recognizing both of them. But the confusion remained, grew stronger. Nadine felt it immediately. The interface was receiving contradictory data. Sophie's genetic markers were pure, direct from Gerald, through his father's unbroken line, back to Magnus and Sequeli. But Nadine's markers were adoptive, carried through marriage and through Sophie herself. The system had been designed for bloodline, not marriage. It was focusing on Sophie, trying to interface with her alone, and the information flow was too strong. Sophie cried out, her knees buckling. Nadine caught her, pulling her hand from the door. "Sophie, can you hear me?" Her daughter's eyes were unfocused, seeing beyond the physical cavern into layers of information Nadine had only glimpsed. "So much, Mom, there's so much. They showed me everything. The civilization, how they rose and fell. The vessel isn't just coming, it's been circling for millennia, waiting for a signal for permission to land." She blinked, clarity slowly returning. "We can't just shut it down. We have to answer. Have to tell it what we want." Nadine helped Sophie sit on the stone floor, processing this new information. "Answer how?" "The system needs two things," Sophie explained, her voice steadier now. "Genetic confirmation and conscious choice. I have the genetic key, inherited through Dad from Sequeli's line. You have the conscious choice, earned through Dad's sacrifice and your willingness to face this honestly. But we each need to interface separately first, then together. Otherwise it can't read our intent properly." Victor stepped forward. "What happens if you answer wrong?" Sophie's expression was grim. "The vessel interprets rejection as a threat. The fragment has weapons systems dormant for 12,000 years. If we refuse the vessel's return improperly, it activates them. Self-defense protocols. If we accept incorrectly, the vessel assumes we're the original builders, comes in fast without caution. Either way could trigger catastrophe. So what's the right answer?" Harlan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie looked at her mother, understanding passing between them without words. "The truth. We tell it the truth. We're the descendants, not the builders. We're not ready for contact, but we're learning. We ask for more time." Nadine saw the elegance of it, the deeply human wisdom built into the system. The ancient civilization had trusted their descendants to be honest, to not claim knowledge they didn't have. They'd built in human choice, human judgment, even knowing that humans might choose wrong. "How do we do this?" Nadine asked. Sophie explained the sequence she'd perceived in those brief moments of overwhelming contact. First, she would interface alone, establishing the genetic link, proving to the system that the bloodline had survived. Then Nadine, establishing the conscious choice, the adult decision-making that proved humanity had matured enough for at least this first step. Then together, they would form the complete message. The system would translate their intent into a signal comprehensible to whatever intelligence guided the approaching vessel. But it required complete honesty. The interface read thoughts, not just touch. Any attempt to manipulate or control the outcome would fail. They had to truly mean what they communicated. Victor began recording on his phone, documenting everything. "The world needs to know this happened," he said quietly. "Even if we're in prison when we show them." Nadine and Sophie prepared, removing watches and rings, anything that might interfere. The bracelet stayed on Sophie's wrist, necessary protection, part of the system's design. They discussed what they would think, what they would communicate. Simple truth, we're learning, we need time, we welcome eventual contact. But on terms of mutual understanding, not desperation or worship, Sophie approached the door first, alone. She placed both palms flat on the stone. The symbols engulfed her in light, and her body went rigid, eyes wide but unseeing. Data flowed into her, through her. Nadine could see it somehow. See the genetic sequence activating ancient pathways in her daughter's DNA. Markers lighting up like stars forming a constellation. A bridge across 12,000 years. Sophie saw the builders. Their faces human and familiar and strange all at once. Saw their children playing in cities that had crumbled to dust before the pyramids were built. Saw the long chain of descent, survival through catastrophe and ice and change, down to herself. She understood now why they'd sealed the warning, not to hide it, but to preserve it, to keep it safe until the right moment. Until humanity was mature enough to listen without destroying itself in panic or greed. The light released her, and she staggered back. Nadine caught her, held her steady. "Did it work?" Sophie nodded weakly. "Your turn, Mom. Show it who we've become." Nadine approached the door, her heart steady despite everything. This was for Gerald, for Sophie, for every human being who deserved a chance to face the future with open eyes. She placed her palms on the stone, and the door opened. Not physically. It remained solid stone. But it ceased to be a barrier, became instead a threshold. Light poured through from the chamber beyond. Structured light full of information and intent. Nadine stepped through. Into the archive. The space was twice the size of the outer cavern, but it wasn't empty rock. It was filled with light, holographic projections floating in intricate three-dimensional patterns. Star maps rotated slowly, showing the galaxy from perspectives no human had seen. Data streams flowed like rivers of luminescence, containing everything the ancient civilization had known. Their history, their science, their art, their mistakes. All preserved in holographic crystal matrices, waiting for descendants to access when ready. This was the gift they'd left behind. Not power to exploit, but knowledge to learn from. And it was asking her permission to share, waiting for her conscious choice to accept or refuse. Nadine granted permission, and understanding flowed in gently this time, measured by her own capacity. She saw their faces, the ancient ones. They looked like modern humans because they were modern humans. The same hopes, the same fears, the same love for their children. They'd known the vessel would return someday, had hoped their descendants would be ready, would have grown wise enough to meet it properly. Behind her, Sophie entered, followed by the three men. All stared in wonder at the floating archive. "This is what we wanted," Victor whispered. "All these years, this is what we imagined, and we killed for it," Lowell said, his voice breaking. "Killed the one man who understood it should be given freely, not taken by force." Harlan fell to his knees, weeping, the weight of their crime finally crushing them completely. They saw now what Gerald had protected, not power to exploit, but sacred responsibility to honor. Nadine focused on the central hologram, a representation of the transmission system. She could see the signal building, preparing to launch into space. The countdown, 6 hours remaining. She reached toward it with her mind, the interface responding eagerly to her intention. She thought clearly, honestly, we are their children. We carry their DNA, but not their wisdom yet. We need more time to grow, to mature. We don't reject the vessel's return. We ask for patience, for gradual contact. Let us prove ourselves worthy of their legacy. The hologram pulsed, acknowledging her message. But it needed confirmation, needed Sophie's agreement as well. One voice might be a mistake, an accident. Two voices together represented conscious choice by the bloodline. Sophie stepped beside her mother. Together, they touched the central projection, their thoughts merging, becoming a unified message. Two generations speaking as one. Grandmother's wisdom, granddaughter's hope. The system accepted. It began encoding the transmission, converting human thought into whatever language the vessel would understand. The light in the chamber intensified, data flowing upward through solid rock, through earth and air, to where the fragment's main body rested, embedded in the mountain's peak. The beacon that had been calling across space for 12,000 years, now it transmitted something different. Not come home, but we're growing. Not rejection, but request. Patience, please. Give us time to become worthy of what you left behind. Nadine felt the acknowledgement return, faster than light should travel, through quantum channels she didn't understand but could sense. A vast intelligence, ancient and patient, receiving the message across light years of emptiness. The vessel was real. It was out there, and it was slowing, adjusting course. Not landing, but taking a distant orbit. Waiting, watching, allowing time. The transmission completed. The light in the chamber faded to a gentle glow. The countdown stopped at exactly 0, then reset. A new timeline displayed, 50 years until the next contact window. Sophie could read it now, the knowledge transferred through her direct interface. "Next generation will decide," she said softly. Nadine nodded, understanding. This wasn't ending. It was beginning. Humanity had been given a grace period, time to prepare, to grow, to choose their path forward. But the knowledge was here, preserved, waiting for when they were ready to study it properly. "This will change everything," Victor said, still recording. When people see this, understand what's here, which is why it must be controlled, Nadine said firmly. Released carefully with context, not splashed across social media for profit. This knowledge requires preparation, just like the interface. The three men nodded, finally understanding what Gerald had understood decades ago. Some truths must be guarded until the time is right. We'll testify to everything, Lowell said quietly. Gerald's murder, our obsession, all of it. The confession will lend credibility to the discovery. Prove we're not fabricating it for attention. We can establish a foundation, Harlan added. Proper research team, ethical oversight. Make sure this is studied responsibly. After you've served your sentences, Nadine said, pay your debt to Gerald and to society first. Then, if you're sincere, help manage this legacy properly. They accepted the terms without argument. Justice and redemption intertwined, the only path forward. The chamber began to seal itself, ancient mechanisms engaging. The stone door reformed, closing over the archive. Not locked now, just closed, waiting for the next Ashcroft to open it when humanity was ready for more. 3 months into their work as watchers, everything changed. It started with Sophie's phone call at 3 in the morning. Nadine fumbled for the receiver in her dark bedroom, heart already racing because nothing good happened at 3 a.m. Mom, you need to get to the cabin, now. What's wrong? Is it the seal? Is it breaking? No, worse. Someone else has found it. Nadine was on the road within 30 minutes. Coffee in a travel mug, emergency supplies thrown into her overnight bag. The 5-hour drive felt endless, her mind spinning through possibilities. Another researcher gone rogue, one of the 3 imprisoned men breaking silence. The government finally taking an interest? She arrived at the cabin at dawn to find Sophie's car already there, along with 2 other vehicles she didn't recognize. Her daughter met her at the porch, face pale with stress and lack of sleep. There's a group. They call themselves the Followers of the First Light. They showed up 2 days ago with copies of the 1889 photographs, the original property surveys, and something else. Another ledger, one we didn't know existed. Sophie handed Nadine an aged leather book, different from the Watcher's ledger but similar in style. The cover read, Record of the Faithful, begun 1889, by order of James Delane. Nadine's stomach dropped. Delane kept his own records? More than records, instructions, a roadmap for his descendants on how to access the site when the Ashcroft line failed. He was more organized than we thought, more patient. And his followers have been waiting just as long as the Watchers. Inside the cabin, Nadine found 5 people gathered around the old table. 3 men, 2 women, ranging in age from 30s to 50s. They looked up when she entered, and she saw the same fevered certainty in their eyes that she'd seen in Victor, Lowell, and Harlan. The look of people who'd given everything to a belief. The oldest man stood, extending his hand. Mrs. Ashcroft, I'm Marcus Delane, James's great-great-grandson. We need to talk about the proper management of the First Light. Nadine ignored his hand. The archive is sealed. It will remain sealed until humanity demonstrates readiness. And who decides readiness? A woman asked. She was sharp-featured, early 40s, with the intense focus of a true believer. Your family? A secret cabal of so-called watchers? The First Light belongs to everyone who has the courage to receive it. It belongs to everyone who has the wisdom not to destroy themselves with it, Nadine corrected. Your ancestor touched it without preparation, and it broke something in him, made him wealthy but fractured his judgment. That's not enlightenment, that's damage. Marcus shook his head. You've been taught the Ashcroft interpretation of history. Sequili made a mistake choosing Magnus instead of James. She was old, frightened of change. James understood the potential, the opportunity, but Magnus buried it in superstition and fear. Sophie stepped forward. I've interfaced with the archive directly. I've seen what it contains. It's not mystical wisdom or supernatural power. It's a warning system about an approaching vessel. And we've already sent our message. We asked for time. The vessel has agreed. We have 50 years to prepare properly. 50 years to sit on knowledge that could transform humanity now, another man argued. Cure diseases, solve climate change, end poverty. And you want us to wait because you're afraid. We want you to wait because rushing leads to disaster, Nadine said firmly. The ancient civilization had all that knowledge. They still destroyed themselves through fear and conflict. Knowledge alone doesn't create wisdom. Marcus pulled out a tablet, showing them satellite data. The fragment has been more active since you performed your ritual. Electromagnetic readings, gravitational anomalies, even atmospheric effects. The site is changing, Mrs. Ashcroft, and changes attract attention. How long before governments notice? Before military organizations decide to take control? He wasn't wrong, and that terrified her more than his presence. They'd been so focused on controlled revelation that they hadn't considered others might detect the changes independently. What do you want? Sophie asked. Access to the archive. We're willing to follow protocols. Wear the protective bracelet. Approach with proper reverence. But we deserve the same chance you had. We carry the genetic markers too. James's children intermarried with local tribes, just like the Ashcrofts did. We have the same right to interface. Nadine studied them, seeing the truth in their claim. The genetic markers weren't exclusively Ashcroft property. They were scattered through multiple bloodlines, multiple families. But giving them access meant risking another premature activation, another signal sent before humanity was truly ready. We need time to consider this, she said carefully. To consult with the research team we've assembled. We don't have time, the sharp-featured woman said. She pulled out her own tablet, showing different satellite data. This is from yesterday. An unidentified object entered Earth's orbit. Silent, cold, not broadcasting on any frequency we can detect. But it's there, and it's positioned directly above this location. The blood drained from Nadine's face. That's not possible. The vessel was supposed to take a distant orbit. Wait 50 years before returning. Maybe something changed, Marcus said quietly. Maybe your message was interpreted differently than you intended. Or maybe it triggered something else entirely, a scout probe, a monitoring system, who knows? But something is up there watching. And we need to understand what it wants before it decides we're not worth the wait. Sophie took the tablet, studying the data with her teacher's methodical attention to detail. Her face grew increasingly concerned. This data is legitimate. I recognize the source codes. These are from the International Space Station's monitoring systems. Someone hacked their database to get this. We have people with skills, Marcus admitted. Skills your proper research team might lack. We're not academics playing at understanding. We're true believers who've dedicated our lives to this moment. The problem was growing more complex by the minute. An object in orbit that shouldn't be there. A group with legitimate genetic claims demanding access. Government and military detection growing more likely each day. The careful, controlled plan Nadine and Sophie had developed was crumbling. Let me see the Delane ledger, Nadine said. Marcus handed it over reluctantly. She sat at the table and began reading, Sophie looking over her shoulder. The entries paralleled the Watcher's ledger, but with crucial differences. James Delane's first entry, dated the same day as Magnus Ashcroft's, told a different story. June 17th, 1889. The old woman chose Magnus out of fear, not wisdom. She saw what the light showed me, the future, the truth, and called it madness. But I was never mad. I saw clearly for the first time in my life. The light is a gift, meant to be shared, not hidden. I accept that I cannot access it now. The seals are too strong, and Magnus has the cooperation of the locals. But I have planted seeds. My children carry the markers. Their children will carry them further. One day, the Ashcroft line will fail or weaken, and my descendants will be ready. We will free the light and fulfill its true purpose. Subsequent entries detailed a multi-generational plan. Strategic marriages to maintain and spread the genetic markers. Acquisition of land around the Ashcroft property. Infiltration into Cascade Timber's management structure. The Delane family had been playing a long game, patient and methodical. The most recent entry was dated 1 week ago, written in Marcus's handwriting. The moment has arrived. Sophie Ashcroft has successfully interfaced and sent a message to the vessel. But her message spoke only for the Watchers, not for all of humanity. We must correct this. We must show the vessel that some of us are ready, eager, willing to receive what they offer without fear. Nadine closed the ledger, understanding the depth of the problem. This wasn't just about controlling access to the archive. It was about competing visions of humanity's future, one cautious and prepared, one bold and immediate. "You can't stop us," Marcus said quietly. "We know about the mirror, the hidden stairway, the copper bracelet. We have everything we need except the Ashcroft cooperation. And if you won't give that voluntarily, we'll find another way. There are always other ways." It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. Nadine felt the weight of Gerald's burden settling more heavily on her shoulders. He'd dealt with this same pressure for decades, 3 families circling, pushing, never quite attacking but never backing down either. "What if you're wrong?" Sophie asked suddenly. "What if opening the archive again, sending another message, confuses the vessel? What if it interprets multiple signals as human instability, decides we're not ready after all?" "Then at least we tried," the sharp-featured woman said. "Better to reach for the stars and fall than to cower in caves hiding from the light." The philosophical divide was unbridgeable. Nadine saw that clearly now. No amount of argument would convince either side. This would have to be resolved another way. "Give us 24 hours, she said. "Let us consult with our research team, with experts who understand the technology better than any of us. If the object in orbit is real, if it's responding to the site, we need to understand what we're dealing with before anyone else interfaces with the archive." Marcus considered this. 24 hours. "But we're not leaving. We'll camp on the property, maintain our presence. We have as much right to be here as you do." It was the best compromise available. Nadine nodded, and the followers of the First Light filed out to set up their camp in the clearing. Through the window, Nadine watched them efficiently erect tents, establish a perimeter, settle in for the long wait. Sophie was already on her phone, calling Dr. Okafor and the other researchers. "We need everyone here, now. We have a situation." Nadine pulled out the watcher's ledger, turning to a blank page. She wrote carefully, "October 29th, 2025, addendum. A complication has arisen. The Delane family descendants have found us, and they bring concerning news. An object has appeared in Earth's orbit, positioned above the site. We don't know if this is the vessel responding to our message, a scout probe, or something else entirely. We must determine the truth before proceeding. The careful plan we developed may no longer be sufficient. Humanity's future may be arriving faster than we prepared for." She set down the pen, looking at her daughter. Sophie's face reflected the same fear and determination Nadine felt. "What if Marcus is right?" Sophie asked quietly. "What if we're too cautious? What if the vessel is here because they're ready for us, even if we're not ready for them?" "Then we'll face it together," Nadine said. "The watchers, the followers, the researchers, all of us. But we face it with open eyes and united purpose, or we don't face it at all." Outside, the sun was setting again. Nadine had lost track of how many sunsets she'd watched from this porch, each one marking another day, closer to whatever was coming. But this sunset felt different, final somehow, like the last moment of an old world before a new one began. She touched the copper bracelet on her wrist, feeling its reassuring weight. Tomorrow, they would need to descend into the archive again, would need to determine if the object in orbit was friend or threat or something humans didn't have words for yet. Tomorrow, everything might change. But tonight, she would keep watch. Just as her husband had done, just as Magnus had done, just as Sequili had done before them all. The burden of the watchers had never been to hide forever. It had been to wait for the right moment to reveal, and that moment, whether they were ready or not, was arriving. Dr. Okafor arrived first, driving through the night from the Seattle airport, where she'd caught the first available flight. She brought specialized equipment, electromagnetic sensors, spectrographic analyzers. Instruments Nadine couldn't name, but understood, were designed to measure the unmeasurable. The other researchers arrived through the morning: Dr. Yamamoto from Tokyo, Dr. Silva from São Paulo, Dr. Running Bear from the Lakota Nation. Each brought their expertise and their own connection to the site, through genetic memory or dreams, or simply an inexplicable pull toward this place. By noon, the cabin clearing looked like a strange hybrid of archaeological dig and military encampment. Research equipment competed for space with the followers' tents. Satellite uplinks transmitted data to institutions around the world, while people argued philosophy around campfires. Marcus Delane presented his orbital data to the assembled group. The object was real, confirmed by multiple sources. Approximately 300 meters across, irregular shape suggesting artificial construction. It had appeared suddenly 2 weeks ago, shortly after Sophie and Nadine's interface with the archive, and had maintained precise geostationary position above the cabin ever since. "It's watching," Dr. Silva said, studying the data. "Monitoring. But for what purpose?" "To see if we're ready," Marcus answered. "Our message said we needed time. This is their way of testing us, seeing how we handle their presence. Or it's an automated monitoring system," Dr. Okafor countered. "A probe, checking if the fragment's activation was legitimate or accidental. We can't assume intent without more information." The philosophical divide remained, but now both sides agreed on one thing. They needed to communicate with the object, determine its purpose. And the only way to do that was through the archive. "We can't all go down," Nadine said firmly. "The passages are narrow, the air limited, and we don't know how the archive will react to multiple people interfacing simultaneously." "Then, representatives," Marcus proposed. "2 watchers, 2 followers, equal partnership moving forward." Sophie shook her head. "The genetic markers aren't equal. Mom and I successfully interfaced because we have direct bloodline connection. Your markers might be diluted differently, might not provide the same protection. Then let us try with the bracelet," the sharp-featured woman, who'd introduced herself as Sarah Delane, Marcus's cousin, argued. "If it works for us, we prove we're equals. If it doesn't, we accept the Watcher's primacy." It was a reasonable compromise, though Nadine hated every aspect of it. But they were out of time for debate. The object in orbit wasn't going away, and every hour increased the risk of government detection and intervention. "We go down in pairs," she decided. "Sophie and I will interface first, re-establish contact with the archive. If it responds positively, we'll allow Marcus and Sarah to attempt the same. Dr. Okafor monitors from the upper chamber, ready to pull us out if anything goes wrong." They descended as the afternoon sun slanted through the pines. The passages felt different this time, charged with expectation, with the weight of more than just 2 people's hopes. The archive would determine humanity's path forward, whether they approached as unified species or fractured groups competing for advantage. The sealed door responded to their presence, symbols flowing in welcome. Nadine placed her palm against it, feeling the familiar rush of connection. But something was different. The interface felt distant, distracted, as if its attention was divided. She understood immediately. It was monitoring the object in orbit, analyzing it, determining its nature. The archive was just as uncertain as they were about what had arrived. Sophie placed her hand beside her mother's, and together they stepped through the threshold into the chamber of light. The holographic archive swirled around them, star maps and data streams moving in complex patterns. But there was something new, a representation of Earth orbit, showing the planet surrounded by satellites and debris. And there, in geostationary position above their location, the object. It wasn't dark or cold, as the human detection systems had registered. It was active, alive with purpose, observing through sensors far more sophisticated than anything humans had deployed. "It's not the vessel," Sophie breathed. "It's too small, too simple in design." "It's a communications relay," Nadine finished, understanding flowing from the archive. "The vessel received our message, but needed to establish closer monitoring before committing to the 50-year wait. This probe is its way of maintaining contact, of watching our development." The archive showed them the relay's purpose, 2-way communication. It could receive messages from the surface and transmit them instantaneously to the vessel, wherever it was in the galaxy. and it could receive responses, relay them back. They had a direct line to whatever intelligence guided the ancient vessel. "We need to send another message," Sophie said. "Clarify our intent. Make sure there's no confusion." But the archive was showing them something else now, a queue of attempted communications already sent. Not from them, from others. The image resolved into clarity. Sarah Delane, Marcus's cousin, standing in this exact chamber 3 nights ago. She'd found the passages through some combination of dreams and Delane family records. She'd interfaced without the bracelet, without preparation, and she'd sent a message: "We are ready now." Some of us, at least. Those brave enough to embrace the future without fear. "Come for us." Nadine's blood ran cold. The careful message she and Sophie had crafted, asking for time, had been contradicted. The vessel had received 2 opposing messages from the same location. Human division made manifest, proving perhaps that humanity wasn't ready after all. What did they respond? Sophie asked the archive. The holographic display shifted, showing the relay's last received transmission. A single question, rendered in symbols, the archive translated for them. Which voice speaks for humanity? They had no answer. Because the truth was, neither voice spoke for all of humanity. They were just 2 families with competing visions, neither with authority to represent 7 billion people. The archive showed them one more thing. A countdown. Not to the vessel's arrival this time, but to a decision point. The relay was programmed to wait 72 hours for a unified response. If none came, if humanity remained divided, unable to speak with one voice, the vessel would interpret this as failure, would move on, leave humanity to develop alone for another 1,000 years or more. They had 3 days to unite the watchers and the followers, to craft a message that represented not just caution or boldness, but wisdom. 3 days to prove they deserved the gift the ancient civilization had left behind. 3 days to show they'd learned from their ancestors' mistakes, or repeat them and lose this chance forever. Nadine and Sophie emerged from the passages to find the clearing transformed into something between a council and a battlefield. Word had spread about Sarah's unauthorized interface, and the fragile cooperation had shattered. The followers were defending her right to send her own message. The researchers were arguing about protocols violated. Dr. Okafor was trying to restore order and failing. Enough! Nadine's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with the authority of 40 years managing rowdy students. "We have 72 hours to give the relay a unified answer. After that, the vessel leaves and won't return for 1,000 years. So you can keep arguing about who had the right to do what, or you can focus on what happens next." The clearing fell silent. Marcus stepped forward, his face troubled. "Sarah acted without my knowledge or approval. But I understand why she did it. We've waited 5 generations for this opportunity. The thought of waiting another 1,000 years, your ancestor waited 1 generation, and it drove him half mad," Sophie interrupted. "The archive isn't a prize to be claimed. It's a responsibility to be earned. And right now, we're failing that test spectacularly." Sarah pushed through the crowd, defiant but with uncertainty in her eyes. "I saw what you saw in there. The ancient knowledge, the potential. How can you ask us to wait when we could save lives, solve problems, advance humanity right now?" "Because advancing without wisdom creates new problems," Dr. Running Bear said quietly. He was the eldest researcher present, 73, with long silver hair and the patient bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning when to speak and when to listen. "My people have stories about this. About the difference between taking power and receiving it as a gift. Taking always ends in disaster. But we can't just wait either," Dr. Silva added. "The object in orbit changes everything. We're visible now. Other governments will notice, will come with their own agendas. We need to establish clear communication with the vessel before that happens." The problem was becoming clearer. They needed to send a message that honored both perspectives, acknowledging humanity's readiness to learn while respecting the dangers of rushing. A message that showed unity despite diversity of opinion. "We need to speak together," Nadine said slowly, the idea forming as she voiced it. not watchers or followers, but representatives of humanity's complexity. Show the vessel that we can disagree and still cooperate, that our division isn't weakness but diverse strength, Marcus frowned. How do we do that? Multiple people interfacing at once? The archive might not support it. The archive showed me something, Sophie said. In the ancient civilization, decisions like this weren't made by individuals. They were made by councils. Multiple people linking consciousness through the interface, creating a consensus view. It's possible, but it requires trust. Complete openness. If anyone tries to dominate or deceive, the whole process fails. Sarah's defiance softened slightly. You'd trust me to be part of that. After what I did, I don't have a choice, Nadine said honestly. You already sent your message. It's part of the equation now. We can either treat you as an enemy or as a partner who made a mistake. Which do you want to be? The question hung in the cold afternoon air. Sarah looked at Marcus, at her fellow followers, then back at Nadine. A partner, if you'll have me. They spent the next 6 hours preparing. Dr. Okafor configured monitoring equipment to track their neural activity during the interface. Dr. Yamamoto prepared meditation exercises to help synchronize their mental states. Dr. Silva documented everything, creating a record that could be shared with the broader scientific community when the time came. As sunset approached, they selected the council, Nadine and Sophie representing the Watcher's caution, Marcus and Sarah representing the followers' urgency, Dr. Okafor representing scientific methodology, Dr. Running Bear representing indigenous wisdom about sacred knowledge. 6 people, 6 perspectives, attempting what the ancient civilization had managed only briefly before fear and division destroyed them. They descended together. The passages barely accommodating 6 people moving in careful single file. The sealed door recognized them, symbols flowing in complex patterns as it registered multiple genetic markers, multiple intents. They arranged themselves in a circle before the door, each placing one hand on its surface. Nadine felt the connections form, not physical but mental, a web of consciousness linking them through the archive's ancient interface. She could feel Sophie's determination, Marcus's hunger tempered now with caution, Sarah's remorse and hope tangled together, Dr. Okafor's analytical precision, Dr. Running Bear's deep peace, her own weary resolve. The archive opened, and they stepped through together into the chamber of light. The holographic displays responded to their presence, multiplying to accommodate 6 different viewpoints, 6 different understanding levels. Each person saw what they needed to see, but all saw the same fundamental truth. The relay was waiting. The vessel was watching. And humanity had one chance to show they'd grown beyond the mistakes that destroyed their ancestors. Together, they began to craft a message. Not caution alone or boldness alone, but something more complete. A message that said we are diverse, we are learning, we make mistakes, but we refuse to let fear or greed dominate our response. We acknowledge both our limitations and our potential. We ask not for unlimited time or immediate contact, but for graduated engagement. Let us prove ourselves in stages, demonstrate growth through action rather than words. The archive translated their unified intent into language the vessel could understand, encoding millennia of human experience into a coherent transmission. It flowed through the relay and into space, faster than light, carrying humanity's answer across the vast emptiness, and in the silence that followed, they waited to see if it had been enough. The response came not in words, but in understanding, flowing through the relay and into their linked consciousness. The vessel acknowledged their message with something that felt like approval, like an elder recognizing wisdom in the young. It showed them a revised timeline, graduated contact over the next 50 years, small interactions at first, increasing as humanity demonstrated readiness. The relay would remain in orbit, monitoring, facilitating communication, but not interfering. Humanity had been given not just time, but partnership, a chance to grow with guidance rather than alone or overwhelmed. When they emerged from the passages, Night had fallen. The clearing was quiet, others having retreated to give them space. The 6 council members sat on the cabin porch, too exhausted for immediate celebration, too relieved for despair. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "We actually did it. We did something," Nadine corrected gently. "Now comes the harder part, living up to what we promised." Over the following weeks, that truth became increasingly clear. The relay's presence was detected by multiple governments and space agencies. Questions were asked, investigations launched. The controlled revelation Nadine had hoped for became rapid, chaotic disclosure. But having the 6-person council already formed, already established as mediators between different human perspectives, provided crucial stability. They testified before closed congressional committees, explaining the archive's nature without revealing its exact location. They consulted with NASA on communication protocols. They worked with the United Nations to establish international oversight, preventing any single nation from claiming the site. Victor, Lowell and Harlan were released from prison early, their testimony crucial to establishing the legal framework for managing the site. They kept their promise, helping establish the foundation that would oversee research and ensure ethical access to the archive's knowledge. Their guilt would never fully fade, but they found purpose in service. In trying to make Gerald's death mean something, Sophie became the Foundation's director, managing the delicate balance between openness and protection. She assembled a team of researchers from every continent, ensuring diverse perspectives guided humanity's engagement with the ancient knowledge. Marcus and Sarah joined the Leadership Council, representing those who pushed for faster progress, ensuring the Foundation didn't become too cautious. The tension between caution and urgency remained, but it was productive tension now, driving careful innovation rather than reckless endangerment. Dr. Okawa continued her research on the genetic markers, discovering they were far more widespread than initially believed. Millions of people carried traces of the ancient civilization's DNA, each potentially capable of interfacing with the archive given proper preparation. The Watchers weren't a bloodline, but a calling, open to anyone with courage and wisdom. 6 months after the Council's unified message, Nadine returned to the cabin alone. She needed quiet, needed to process everything that had changed. The site was different now, security checkpoints, research facilities being constructed nearby, schedules and protocols replacing the wild isolation that had greeted her that first confused afternoon. But the cabin remained, and the mirror still hung on the wall. She stood before it, seeing her own face reflected truly. 70 years old now, hair completely silver, new lines carved by stress and exhaustion and occasional joy. She looked like a grandmother who'd stumbled into saving the world, which was more or less accurate. Gerald's journal sat on the table where she'd left it. She opened it to his last entry. "I failed to protect her from the truth." On the blank page facing it, she wrote her own response. "You didn't fail, my love. You protected me until I was strong enough to face this. Until our daughter was grown enough to help. Your timing was perfect, even if accidental. We're okay. More than okay. We're doing what you couldn't, sharing the burden, the wonder, the responsibility. Thank you for giving me this purpose, even if it came wrapped in confusion and grief. I miss you. I understand you. And I forgive you." She closed the journal gently, feeling a weight lift that she hadn't known she still carried. Outside, Sophie was arriving for their weekly check-in. At 42, her daughter had grown into the role of Foundation Director with natural authority. She handled pressure that would crush most people, balanced competing interests with diplomatic skill, and still found time to call her mother daily. They sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the pines in gold and shadow. Somewhere above them, invisible but present, the relay maintained its patient watch. And somewhere beyond that, the vessel moved through space at its own pace, content now to wait and observe. "Dr. Running Bear wants to perform a blessing ceremony next month," Sophie said. "Invite tribal representatives from across the Americas. Honor the indigenous guardians who kept this place sacred long before our family inherited the duty." "That's appropriate," Nadine agreed. This was never just the Ashcrofts' burden. We were borrowing it from people who understood it better. Sophie nodded, then smiled. Marcus proposed a partnership program, followers and watchers mentoring new researchers together. He says our differences make us stronger as long as we stay in dialogue. Gerald would be surprised, Nadine said. He spent his whole life keeping people away from this place. Now we're inviting them in, carefully but genuinely. Dad was doing the best he could with what he understood. We know more now. We can do better. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged. The same stars humans had watched for thousands of years, wondering if they were alone. Now they knew they weren't, had never been. The ancient civilization that built the archive had been human, and something beyond human watched with interest to see what their descendants would become. Nadine thought about the journey from that first afternoon, standing in the attorney's office learning she'd inherited a cabin instead of security. How angry she'd been, how betrayed. If someone had told her then that she'd spend her final years as a guardian of humanity's future, she would have laughed. But life rarely followed expected paths. Sometimes loss opened doors that prosperity kept locked. Sometimes endings were disguised beginnings. She'd lost a husband and a comfortable retirement. She'd gained purpose and connection to something vast. She wasn't sure if it was a fair trade, but it was the trade life had offered. And she was done arguing with what couldn't be changed. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked. "That your father would be proud of you. That I'm proud of you. That I'm grateful to have shared this with you, even though it was hard and frightening and still isn't finished." Sophie leaned against her mother's shoulder, and they watched the night deepen over the Oregon mountains. In the cabin behind them, the mirror reflected their silhouettes. Two women keeping watch, protecting possibilities, guarding humanity's bridge between past and future. The watcher's ledger lay open on the table inside, ready for the next entry. The story wasn't ending. It was evolving, spreading, becoming something larger than one family's secret burden. In the years to come, others would add their voices, their perspectives, their wisdom. The relay would observe. The vessel would wait. And humanity would grow, stumble, learn, try again. That was the message they'd sent. We're imperfect but learning. We make mistakes but correct them. We're divided but can unite when it matters. Give us time, watch us grow, and maybe someday we'll be ready to meet you as equals rather than supplicants. The vessel had accepted that message, had seen something in humanity worth nurturing, worth patience. Nadine hoped they could live up to that faith, hoped the next 50 years would show steady progress rather than regression, hoped her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would handle this legacy with wisdom she could barely imagine. But hope was all any generation could offer the next. Hope in the hard work of building something better. She looked at her daughter, saw strength and compassion in equal measure. Saw the future wearing a face she loved. They would be okay. Not perfect, not without struggle, but okay. And in a universe as vast and strange as the archive had shown them, okay was enough. More than enough. It was everything.